So our third session, I'm going to invite Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum back. And this time we're looking at the Arab states in Bible prophecy. Please give a welcome to Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum. Try and get this as close to you as I can.
You got to bring this down to a Jewish level. Anyone not have a copy of the outline on the Arab states and prophecy? Raise your hand. We'll try to get them out to you. Anyone not get one? A few hands here, so keep them up and we'll see what we can do. On your outline, we're going to try to cover this material in three main areas. First of all, we'll deal with the root of the conflict, which was with two individuals, Ishmael and Esau. Then we'll do a short section on the perpetual hatred or animosity of the Arab people against the Jews. And then we'll spend the rest of our time with Roman numeral 3. God does not have the same future for each of the individual Arab states, but so we'll have to deal with them individually and see what God has in store. Okay, go ahead and turn your Bibles to Genesis chapter 12. In verses 1, 2, and 3 of chapter 12, God calls Abram to leave his home, to leave his country, to leave his family, and just begin heading towards a specific coordinates or distance or direction. Until God tells him to stop. When he arrives to the land of Canaan, God told him to stop. And in verse 7, God appears to Abram and said, "Unto your seed will I give this land." So what Abram is promised upon arrival in what was then called the land of Canaan, is that he will, his seed, his descendants will receive this property, this land. It's not promised to Abram just yet. Now the main section we begin with is now verses 10 through 20. A famine hits the country of Canaan while he was living. His faith had not yet matured to the point that he could trust God in any situation. And hearing that the land of Egypt is not suffering from the drought and so on, he decides to begin to move towards Egypt. On the way, either he already realized it or came across this element of Egyptian morality on the way to Egypt. And on the way to Egypt, either he knew or he heard about this, that the Egyptians individually were very antagonistic towards immorality, especially in dealing with taking a woman that was already married to someone else. And basically, adultery was the most negative thing the Egyptians would approve of or even participate in. So having realized this, he tells Egypt how to pass herself off. He tells Sarah how to pass herself off. And look at verse 12. "It will come to pass when the Egyptians shall see you that they will say, 'This is his wife.' And they will kill me, but they will save you alive. Say, I pray you, that you are my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake, and that my soul may live because of you." Now, it was true that Sarai was the half-sister of Abram, that they both had the same father, just different mothers. And so he was going to pass her off strictly as a sister, but to hide the fact that she was also his wife. And indeed, when he arrives into Egypt, word begins to pass around how beautiful she is. And as far as the people, she was only a sister, not a wife. So we read in verse 15, "And the princes of Pharaoh saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house." Normally, the one who receives the bride price in such a case would be the father of the woman. But however, the father by now has passed away, and therefore the brother of the woman becomes the legal guardian. And therefore, Pharaoh pays to Abraham a large sum of income. He was already a pretty wealthy man, but this wealth was increased in many ways. And notice what the bride price included. Now look at verse 16. He dealt well with Abram for her sake, and he had menservants and maidservants and she-asses and camels. And also in verse 16, what he gave to Abram included a number of maidservants. And therefore, with that one phrase, maidservants, we have the origins of the Arab people, as we'll see. Also, it's important to keep in mind that the Egyptians came from one of the three sons of Noah, and the Egyptians came from Ham. It would not be kosher for Jewish people to come from Ham. So Jews came from Shem, and other Semitic groups also came from Shem. But the thing to notice is that the Egyptians originally were not Semitic people. They were Hamitic people, one of the sons of Noah, and therefore they were in a separate consistency. And that was also true with other national groups in these early days, like the Moabites, the Ammonites, and the Edomites. These were people that were basically Aramaic. Not Armenian, but Aramaic. And what happened with the Arab invasion and the Muslim invasion in the 7th century, they overran Egypt, they overran many of the countries around Israel, and so on. So eventually, many of the residents that were conquered by the Arabs that would not convert to Islam were killed. Others simply converted to Islam, intermarried with the Arab population, and eventually these nations became Arab. But they were not Arabic until the 7th century, and that's 7th century AD. So we need to keep that in mind. And so the language that they had shifted from Aramaic or Egyptian into the Arabic language. And so the Arab invasion took place, the whole area was Arabized. So that's why we have it now, Arab states and prophecy, but at the time of this conquest, these were not Arabic people. So what we have in chapter 12 is what I would call Abram's folly, because he passed his sister as a wife as only his sister. She was taken away, but restored to him. So when Abram left Egypt to go back to Canaan, he was even more wealthier than ever before, though the means of gaining this wealth was not in a straight line. Let's go to chapter 16. In chapter 16, we're going to have Sarah's folly. Between chapter 12 and chapter 16, 10 years have passed. And the laws of that day, which included the laws of Canaan, if a wife proved to be unbarren for 10 years, then she needs to provide her husband with a handmaid, through whom he could have a child, especially a son, and then when the son is born, the son would legally be the son of Sarah, not Hagar. But Hagar would be the biological mother. So finally, Sarah decides to resort to the laws of that day, and Abram agreed. The point is, it wasn't necessary. Abraham already had a promise of a coming son, a covenant son, back in chapter 12. But God did not actually clearly state that Sarah would be the biological mother of the covenant son. And that won't become clear until chapter 17. So assuming now that he can go in this method to get a son through Hagar, and then and have that son become the legal son, not the biological son, but the legal son of Sarah. So that interchange took place. So read in verse 5, and Sarai said to Abram, my wrong be upon you. I gave my handmaid into your bosom, and when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. Jehovah judge between me and you. But Abram said unto Sarai, behold, the maid is in your hand. Do to her that which is good, and in your eyes. And Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her face. So in a pregnant state, and because she was being terribly mistreated by Sarah, and that was Sarah's reaction to the way Hagar was relating to Sarah, which was negative, she flees the household of Abram. But as she flees, there's an encounter. And look at verse 7. And the angel of Jehovah, the angel of Yahweh, the angel of the Lord. That's never a common, ordinary angel. Whenever you see that phrase, that's specifically the visibility of the second member of the triune God. And so he confronts her, and he informs her she will bear a son, and she's to name that son Ishmael, meaning God hears, because God heard her concern, and God responded. But then notice the four characteristics of the son and the descendants of that son will produce. Verse 12, and he shall be as a wild ass among men. Was common in the Negev and in the Sinai desert was herds of wild donkeys roaming around from one part of the desert to the other. And Ishmael now will become a traveler, a wanderer, and his descendants will be wandering from one part of the desert to the other, including Saudi Arabia now, and also including the Negev desert. Now, more recent centuries, the Arab peoples have built a good number of cities like you visit today. But in the early days, they were not building cities, they were wanderers in the desert. Second thing, his hand shall be against every man. As he wanders in the desert, he will come to other people's groups, and the tendency is he'll be characterized by aggression. He'll attack these other groups, and he will, as a result, will come a third principle, every man's hand against him, and the people he attacked will eventually organize and attack him back. And so you have the principle of aggression followed by retaliation. But now look at the fourth statement. He shall dwell over against all his brethren. And the phrase over against means two things. Number one, the descendants of Isaac, the descendants of Ishmael will live side by side. But secondly, it will be with the attitude of hostility. As you can see in the book of Job, chapter 1, verse 11, the book of Job, verses 1 through 11. And so that's what she does. She goes back to the household of Abram, and that's when Ishmael is born. And at this point, Abram thinks that Ishmael is the covenant son. But he'll be corrected in chapter 17. Let's go over now to chapter 21. At the time that Isaac is born, Ishmael will be about 13 years old. Now, we like to throw birthday parties for our children on a yearly basis. That was not the practice in those days, but there will be festivities observed during certain changes in the human development. And one of these periods of time is the day of weaning. And the child was officially weaned somewhere between the ages of 3 and 5. So somewhere between Isaac's age of 3 and 5, at this point that makes Ishmael closer to 16, 17, 18. Notice what is observed by Sarai. So verse 8, and the child grew and was weaned, And Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. So on this occasion, you have the festival of the weaning of Isaac. So Isaac is somewhere between 3 to 5. But then notice there was one person who was spoiling the festivity. Verse 9 rather. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne unto Abraham, mocking. The Hebrew word for mocking and the Hebrew word for Isaac is the same root. You can compare against, if you want to bring out the actual Hebrew wordplay, he was Isaacing Isaac. He was Isaacing Isaac. He was taking Isaac's name and reducing it to mockery. And that would change the status. And now Hagar and Ishmael are expelled from their home. Now they begin what the angel of Yahweh said would happen, the wandering in the desert. And when it came time for the son of Hagar to have a wife, what Hagar did was to make sure that the wife also came from the same ethnic identity. The wife would be Egyptian. Let's look at chapter 21, verse 21. 21. And he dwelled in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took him a wife out of the land of Egypt. Again, the Egyptians were not Arabized yet, any more than Edom or Ammon were Arabized yet. But what happens is that with the Arab invasion of these territories, all of this was Arabized, but not yet. But what we do know from Egyptian records is that the Egyptians had a negative attitude towards all Semites. And they were anti-Semitic, not in the limited sense we use it today, being anti-Jewish, but they were anti-Semitic against all other Semites. And by bringing a Hamitic wife to this Hamitic son, the animosity would continue towards the Semitic side of the family. And Ishmael becomes the main, not the only father of the Arab peoples, but the main person of the Arab people. Now let's turn to Esau and turn to Genesis chapter 25. In Genesis 25, after a long wait, and after Isaac's prayer to God, he prays to God so that his wife will also bear a child. But when she conceives actually twins. And the twins are struggling in the womb of the mother. And God lets her know what the situation will be. And in verse 23 of chapter 25, and Jehovah said unto her, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 peoples shall be separated from your loins, and one people shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. So she's informed that she's going to bring birth to 2 sons. But one son will be born, therefore he is the firstborn son, therefore he is the eldest son, therefore he is the son with the right of the firstborn. But Jacob was born second. We're going to see in the context that Esau didn't much care at all about the birthright. But Jacob very much wants to be in that line. In Christian church history, Jacob has gotten a lot of bad press. There's all kinds of negative things written about Jacob and so on. But what they're missing was really the situation. And Jacob was one who wanted to be in the line of the Abrahamic covenant. Now look at verse 27. And the boys grew, and Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, But Jacob was this is the best rendering in English, but it says he was a quiet man dwelling in tents. This is the ASV. This is the best English rendering of the Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. However, the good thing about this one is that when they use a translation that they did something different than the Hebrew says, they tell you what the Hebrew is on the side margin. So on this ASV side margin, it says the Hebrew means perfect. So why didn't they write perfect in the text? Because of this presupposition of negativism towards Jacob, he's accused of many things he was not guilty of. And they were whereas Esau was a skillful hunter. But in the context of Genesis, that's not a positive statement. Even in chapter 10, Nimrod was a mighty hunter. But it's a negative in the context of Genesis chapter 10. He was a good hunter. He normally came back with venison. He liked to cook venison the way his father liked it. But this time, he was not so lucky. So verse 28, now Isaac loved Esau. Now, did he love Esau for spiritual reasons? No, because he did eat of his venison. So Isaac's love for his brother, for his firstborn son, was based upon something material. He liked the way Esau would get venison and how he would cook venison for his father. But the mother, knowing what God's will was for the younger son, loved Jacob. Now, verse 29, and Jacob boiled pottage, and Esau came in from the field, and he was faint. Esau said to Jacob, feed me, I pray you, with that same red pottage, for I am faint. Therefore his name was called Edom. He came out with more reddish hair, and Edom is the root word for reddishness. And Jacob said, sell me first your birthright. Esau said, behold, I am about to die. What profit shall the birthright do to me? And Jacob said, swear to me first. And he swore to him. And he sold his birthright unto Jacob. Now keep in mind, the household of Isaac was a wealthy household. So all Esau would have to do is take a few steps over the next tent. There would be others who could feed him with some food. But Esau doesn't want to eat any old thing. He wants to eat the lentil soup that Jacob happened to be cooking. And Jacob was willing to sell it to Esau, but only if he sold him the birthright. Now Esau makes a statement here that's not really correct, because it says, I need to eat something right now or I'm going to drop dead. Well, he wasn't about to die. Again, the household of the son of Abraham is quite large. There were other tents with other women cooking different things and so on. But he does, and like I said, he doesn't want to eat any old thing. He wants to eat the very thing that Jacob has been cooking that's more materialistic. And so he agreed to sell his birthright to Jacob. So verse 34, and Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils. He did eat and drink and rose up and went his way. And now notice the last phrase. So Esau despised his birthright. He just didn't care of it. He despised it. He wasn't in favor of any of the spiritual benefits his birthright might give him. And that was his attitude toward his birthright. But now Jacob has the birthright. Let's skip over to chapter 27. At a certain point of time, the patriarch will give the patriarchal blessing. And while Esau did not care anything about the birthright, he wants to be part of the patriarchal blessing because it would mean a lot of material benefits. And the mother of the two sons overhears what Esau instructs Esau, what Isaac instructs Esau, go out and find me some venison, cook me venison the way you cook it and the way I like it, and then I will give you the patriarchal blessing. And the patriarchal blessing with its material benefits is something that Esau would want. However, the rightful person to receive the patriarchal blessing is the one with the birthright. And Esau sold his birthright. He has no right to the patriarchal blessing. Here again, Jacob has been accused of stealing the patriarchal blessing from Esau. He's not stealing anything from Esau. The patriarchal blessing rightfully belongs to Jacob. He now has the birthright. But his mother decides that she needs to intervene. Again, this was her folly, because God already told her that the elder will serve the younger. All she had to do was wait and see how God would intervene. But instead, she pushes her son to deceive the father. Jacob does not want to do this, but he's faced with the mother's influence and so on. And so he dresses with the clothing that belonged to Esau, that would have the smell of Esau. He would also do other things like adding something hairy to his skin, so it feels like he's Esau. And so Jacob's sin in this chapter is not stealing anything belonging to Esau, but the sin is the deception of the father. That's where the sin lay. And so indeed, Jacob receives the patriarchal blessing, and shortly after he leaves the tent of Isaac, then here comes Esau with his venison, and tells Isaac, now you can give me the patriarchal blessing. But the patriarchal blessing was already given to Jacob, and with the rules of that day, he couldn't pass it on. So he gives him a blessing, but it's not the full patriarchal blessing. So look at verse 41 of chapter 27, verse 41 of chapter 27. And Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand, then will I slay my brother Jacob. And here you see Esau's hatred for Jacob because he lost the patriarchal blessing. There was some reconciliation between the two brothers sometime later, but it didn't last for long. In subsequent generations of the people from Esau and the people from Isaac, they're the ones who were antagonistic to Jacob and his descendants. So that's where the root of the problem lay. Let's deal with the second segment, the perpetual hatred towards Israel. Turn to the book of Numbers, chapter 20. The book of Numbers, chapter 20. In chapter 20, the 40 years of wilderness wanderings is about to end. And from where Moses and the people were encamped at this point of time in the wilderness of Zin, which is the southern border of the Promised Land, he sends a message to the king and the king of Edom. But notice how he opens up the letter. Verse 14, and Moses sent messengers from Kadesh unto the king of Edom. Thus says your brother Israel, you know all the travail that has befallen us. What shows is that the king of the Edomites, one after the other, kept a trail, kept knowledge of what's happening to Jacob and his sons and his descendants. And so, Knowing this, Moses makes a plea, let us just pass through, we'll stay only on the main highway, we won't take anything from the right hand or left hand. But you know all that has befallen us, as he gives the details so what the king knows, that they went into Egypt. Initially they had a good situation, but when the 12 sons all passed away, and there were subsequent descendants of Jacob and his 12 sons, then there was persecution. There was finally the Egyptians enslaved the Jews. And they had to build the cities of Pharaoh at very hard labor. But he also points out they knew about the crossing of the Red Sea, and therefore finally left Egypt. And they knew about the 38 years of actual wilderness wanderings. So all of that situation, you would have thought, would have given the king of Edom and the Edomites some measure of sympathy to our brother Jacob. And while Israel had blood ties with other nations like Moab and Ammon, the closest blood tie was Israel and Edom, because these are two nations that came from two twin brothers. There's a story that reflects the Jewish community in Israel here and also in America, of how secular they've become. And there was a Baptist family living in the neighborhood, and then a Jewish family moved in right next door, and they both had sons the same age, and so the two sons became friends. And one day the Baptist son asked the Jewish son to attend Sunday school with him at the Baptist church. And the Jewish son asked his parents. The parents were quite secular, didn't want to make a big issue out of it, and said, okay, you can go this one time. But when you come back, then let us know everything they taught you in case we have to give you a different perspective. The two sons went to the church in the Sunday school class, and when they came to each other's home, the Jewish parents pulled their Jewish son separate and asked them, what did they teach you at that Baptist church? And the son says, well, they taught us all about Moses. The parents were a bit surprised. They taught you about Moses? Yes, they did. Well, what did they say about Moses? What they said was that when Moses led the Jewish people out of Egypt, they came to the Red Sea. So Moses, what he did was build a pontoon bridge over the Red Sea. And the Jews crossed on this pontoon bridge to the other side. And then when the Egyptians tried to follow them on that pontoon bridge, Moses called for an airstrike that destroyed the bridge, that destroyed the Egyptians, and the Jews were saved. And a bit surprised, the parents asked the Jewish son, is this what they taught you at that Baptist school? And the son says, well, to tell you the truth, that's not the way they put it. If I tell you what they really said, you'd never believe it. And that's the status of the Jewish community, not just in different parts of the world, and that includes Israel. But Edom would not give them passage, and skip down to verse 20. And he said, you shall not pass through. And Edom came out against them with much people and with a strong hand. Thus Edom refused to give Israel passage through his border. Wherefore Israel turned away from him. And now they had to make a major detour. They had to walk about 200 miles to the south. And then to the edge of the Red Sea, in where Aqaba is today. That's the biblical Edom, Elat. And he would have them make a round and then go all the way back up north on the main highway that will circle around Edom. And while they're walking 200 miles one way, 200 miles the other way for a total of 400 miles, all the Jewish people found Moses was simply murmuring. And finally, he got them around Edom, settling down in Moab, where he'll finish the book of Deuteronomy, where he will finally have the last confrontation with the Lord, and then he would be buried where no man knows where to be buried. And the conquest began when they were able to cross from Moab across the Jordan River and into the Promised Land per se. As we move in the book of Judges, we read of Ishmaelites and Edomites and other nations attacking and subjugating Israel. But now turn to Psalm 83 that brings it up to our modern day situation. Psalm 83. O God, keep not you silent, hold not your peace, be not still, O God, for lo, your enemies make a tumult, and they that hate you have lifted up your head. They take crafty counsel against your people and consult against your hidden ones. They have said, come, let us cut them off from being a nation. The name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. They have consulted together with one consult. Against you do they make a covenant. The only time we've seen this alliance take place that include all the nations we'll list in a moment in verses 6 to 8 is something that happened initially with the War of Independence of 1948 and also continued with the Six-Day War in 1967. That was the only time all of these nations came together for the purpose of cutting Israel off so that the Israel become a desolation. And people, in the course of time, people would not remember there was a nation called Israel in this territory. Now, by now, all these territories, which began as being Egyptian of a Noahic son, and then Aramaic, and things of that nature, have been totally conquered by the Arab invasion, which was also a Muslim invasion in the 7th century. It's not in the Bible, it's only because the Bible was finished before that invasion occurred. But now these same countries have become Arab countries. Many of the original people were killed if they would not convert, but those who converted were simply intermarried with the Arab population, so they lost their original ethnic identity. And so the Egyptians now became Arabized, so did the land of Jordan, that included Ammon, Moab, and Edom, became Arabized. Now look at the list of nations he mentions. In verse 6, the tents of Edom. Edom is southern Jordan. Edom came from Esau, the secondary father, but then Ishmael, who was the primary father of the Arab people. Moab is central Jordan. The Hagarenes came from Egypt. Gibal came from Lebanon. Ammon is northern Jordan. Amalek would be in the Sinai Peninsula. Philistia is the Gaza Strip. Tyre is also in Lebanon. In verse 8, Assyria is in northern Iraq. Also joined with them, they've helped the children of Lot. So these are the territories. Now what happens in verse 9 onward is not yet fulfilled, but in the first 8 verses you see it fulfilled in the War of Independence and the Six-Day War, 1948 and 1967. Now let's go to the book of Ezekiel, chapter 35. Ezekiel, chapter 35. He's focusing on the land of Edom, which is now southern Jordan. Moreover, the word of Jehovah came unto me, saying, Son of man, set your face against Mount Seir, and prophesy against it, and say unto it, Thus says the Lord Jehovah, Behold, I am against you, O Mount Seir. I will stretch out my hand against you, and I will make you a desolation and astonishment. I will lay your cities waste, and they shall be desolate, and you shall know that I am Jehovah. Now focus on verse 5. Because you've had a perpetual enmity, and has given over the children of Israel to the power of the sword in the time of their calamity, in the time of the iniquity of the end. And so because of Edom's animosity towards twin brother Jacob, there is this continuous animosity towards that people. And therefore, when the judgment comes, it's going to be a bit more severe. Now go to the minor prophet Obadiah. The minor prophet Obadiah. I don't remember what chapter this verse is found in, but I know what the verse is. Verses 10 through 14 describe a perpetual animosity we also saw back in the previous reading. And in verses 15 and 16, he points out the final judgment upon Edom will come in the day of Jehovah, or the day of the Lord, or day of Yahweh. And that is, again, the most common term in both Testaments, for we now use the term tribulation, the great tribulation. But after the judgment of the day of Jehovah is poured out, look at verse 17. But in Mount Zion there shall be those that escape, it shall be holy, and the house of Jacob shall possess their possessions. And the house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau for stubble, and they shall burn among them and devour them. And now look at the next phrase. There shall not be any remaining to the house of Esau, for Jehovah has spoken it. Esau will have no descendants that will enter the kingdom because of this perpetual, continuous animosity. Let's now go to the next segment, the future of the Arab states. Will there ever be peace between Israel and the Arabs? The answer is yes, but not in the same way. But rather, as we shall about to see, intervention by God will bring peace in the Middle East in one of three ways. Some by means of destruction, some by means of occupation, and some by means of conversion. I repeat, peace will come ultimately in three different ways. Either by means of destruction, or by means of occupation, or by means of conversion. So turn now to Ezekiel chapter 47, and the first country we'll deal with is Lebanon. The country called Lebanon, also known as Phoenicia, has always been part of the Promised Land. Most of that part of the Promised Land, the Jewish people, never enjoyed in biblical history, nor will they enjoy it in prophecy. But if you look at chapter 47, verse 13, you go through chapter 48, verse 29, 47, 13 through chapter 49, chapter 48, verse 29, he points out that when the Jewish people will finally settle for the first time in all of the Promised Land, not only did they not have it in biblical times, they don't have it at modern times. But they will have it when the Messianic kingdom is established, and so there'll be a transmigration of an ethnic identity, and it will cease to be an Arab country, it'll be a Jewish country. And some of the tribes of Israel will settle in the north, and the north will include all of Lebanon. And so peace will come between Israel and Lebanon by means of occupation. Let's go to Jordan. Modern-day Jordan comprises three ancient countries, Ammon, Moab, and Edom. Ammon, Moab, and Edom. Also includes the area of Gilead. We have more information about Edom than we'll have for some of the other countries. So we'll go from south to north. We'll deal with the Edomite section of Jordan, which is southern Jordan. And now turn back to Ezekiel chapter 35. And look at verses 6 through 9. Chapter 35, verse 6. Therefore, what for? Because what he said in the previous verse, as we already saw, perpetual animosity. Therefore, as I live, says the Lord Jehovah, I will prepare you unto blood, and blood shall pursue you. Since you have not hated blood, therefore blood shall pursue you. Thus will I make Mount Seir an astonishment and a desolation, and I will cut off from it him that passes through and him that returns. I will fill its mountains with its slain, in your hills and in your valleys, and all the watercourses shall they fall by that are slain with the sword, and I'll make you a perpetual desolation. And your cities shall not be inhabited, and you shall know that I am Jehovah. Skip down to verse 14. Thus says the Lord Jehovah, when the whole earth rejoices, I will make you desolate. As you did rejoice over the inheritance of the house of Israel, and because it was desolate, so will I do unto you, and you shall be desolate, O Mount Seir, and all Edom, even all of it, that they shall know that I am Jehovah. And so what we learn from this passage is that because of the perpetual animosity towards Israel, they will now undergo a perpetual desolation. A perpetual desolation. No inhabitants whatsoever. If you're taking notes, you can also mark down Isaiah 34, verses 8 through 15. Isaiah 34, verses 8 through 15. You can also mark down Jeremiah 49, verses 17 and 18. Jeremiah 49, verses 7 and 18. And we already looked at Obadiah, verses 17 to 21. Obadiah, 17 to 21. But now turn back to chapter 25 of Ezekiel. And look at verse 12. Thus says the Lord Jehovah, because that Edom had dealt against the house of Judah by taking vengeance, had greatly offended, and revenged himself upon them, therefore thus says the Lord Jehovah, I will stretch out my hand upon Edom, and will cut off man and beast from it. I will make it desolate from Teman, even unto Dedan shall they fall by the sword. And I will lay my vengeance upon Edom by the hand of my people Israel. And they shall do in Edom according to my anger and according to my wrath, and they shall know my vengeance, says the Lord Jehovah. Well, he points out if we've taken all of Ezekiel's prophecies and adding Isaiah and so on, what we learn is that God initially used Israel. There's going to be yet a war to break out between at least southern Jordan, ancient Edom, and Israel. And God will use Israel to decimate southern Jordan as much as he intends to let Israel do so. But then, as we saw in chapter 35, there will be a divine wrath, and God will pour out fire and brimstone upon the land of Edom. And so while Satan will spend the Messianic kingdom in the abyss section of Sheol or Hades, his demons will not be there with him. They'll be in two localities. One of these will be the land of Edom, and the other one will be the land of Babylonia. Let's go to the Moabite section and look at Jeremiah 48. So peace comes between Israel and Edom insofar it will be done by means of destruction. Now, he deals with Moab in chapter 48. And in verses 1 through 46, he deals with the destruction of Moab, which is central Jordan. But it will be not as severe as Edom. And then we read in verse 47, "Yet will I bring back the captivity of Moab in latter days, says Jehovah. Thus far is the judgment of Moab." So peace will come between central Jordan and Israel, initially by a partial destruction, but ultimately by conversion, and be a spiritual movement within that land, and the people of that land will come to saving faith. Let's go to northern Jordan, which is the Ammonite section, and look at chapter 49. Verses 1 through 5 deals with a divine destruction similar to the one being sent to Moab. This will be northern Jordan. There'll be a partial destruction. Then we read in verse 6, "But afterward I will bring back the captivity of the children of Ammon, says Jehovah." And so Edom will have no survivors, but Ammon and Moab will. Now, the principle that God uses in the severity of his judgments are two principles. The first principle is, how close are the blood ties? And the closer the blood tie, the more severe the judgment. So the closest blood tie is Israel and Edom, and there's a total annihilation. But Moab and Ammon come from the two daughters of Lot, and Lot was the nephew of Abraham. And therefore the judgment will lead to conversion, will not be as severe as it was upon Edom. Okay, let's turn to Egypt and let's go to Isaiah 19. In chapter 19, verses 1 through 10, he describes a future punishment upon Egypt as Egypt falls into civil war. Then in verses 11 through 15, he deals with the leaders of Egypt that were guilty of leading Egypt astray. And in the end, indeed, three different subsequent leaders of Egypt all threw the country into a war against Israel, and they suffered severe losses. But then you have a three-stage development of moving from destruction to salvation. And each phrase begins with each paragraph begins with the same phrase, "in that day." First of all, in verse 16, "in that day." And it points out in that day, Egypt will develop a very severe fear of the people of Israel, which was introduced in the War of Independence and continued in the Six-Day War. But then came a second "in that day." Look at verse 18. "In that day there shall be 5 cities in the land of Egypt that speak the language of Canaan, and swear to Jehovah of hosts, and one shall be called the city of destruction." The land of Canaan was in Isaiah's day was the Hebrew language. So he points out there'll be 5 cities within Egyptian territory where the language will be Hebrew and not Arabic. Exactly how that's going to occur, we're not told. There is no details beyond what we read in verse 18. We just have to wait and see how God will fulfill it. And then comes the third stage in verses 19 to 22, verse 19, in that day. And what verses 19 to 22 spell out is there's going to be an invasion. And the Egyptians will suffer severely from the invaders. As a result of their suffering from the invading force, they'll turn away from Islam. They'll begin to worship the God of Israel and the person of the Messiah, Yeshua, Jesus the Messiah. And so Egypt will undergo a national conversion. So peace between Israel and Egypt comes initially by destruction, but ultimately by conversion. But now another principle God uses in giving them the final judgments has to do with the history of their anti-Semitism. And Egypt is the oldest anti-Semitic country known in history. Therefore, what Ezekiel chapter 29, verses 8 through 14, Ezekiel 29, verses 8 through 14 spells out that for the first 40 years of the Messianic kingdom, Egypt will suffer a dispersion. And so all of the residents in the land of Egypt will be scattered throughout the world as the Jews were once scattered around the world and still are. And that 40 year of scattering will last for 40 years. But then after 40 years of dispersion, then God will regather all of the Egyptian people and bring them back into the land of Egypt. And at that point, Egypt will regularly send a delegation to Jerusalem on the Feast of Tabernacles. That's in Zechariah chapter 14. Zechariah 14. Now look again in chapter 19 of Isaiah. Verse 23, in that day shall there be a highway out of Egypt to Assyria, and the Assyrian shall come unto Egypt, and the Egyptians shall worship with the Assyrians. Notice the mention of this highway. This highway is the famous Via Maris, the way of the sea. It's the main coastal highway that goes through the coastal land of Canaan and then Israel, from Egypt to Mesopotamia, or from Mesopotamia back to Assyria, back to Egypt. Now, when Israel became a state, the southern border was closed, it was not opened until Egypt signed the peace treaty with Israel, and now the southern border of the Via Maris is open, but the northern border is still closed. But verse 23 focuses on an economic union. But look at verse 24. In that day shall Israel be the third with Egypt, and with Assyria a blessing in the midst of the earth. For that Jehovah of hosts had blessed them, saying, Blessed be Egypt my people, and Assyria the work of my hands, and Israel mine inheritance. So notice there'll be a union of spiritual things. Egypt, Assyria, which is now northern Iraq, and Israel. And so peace will come all the way through by means of conversion. Now let's go back to Jeremiah 49 and look at Saudi Arabia. Peace will come between Israel and Saudi Arabia by means of destruction, but not as severe as it is in southern Jordan or Edom, or as it will be, as we'll see shortly, in Babylonia. What we see in verses 28 to 33, in verses 28 to 33, there'll be a destruction of all cities in what is now Saudi Arabia. The human population will cease to exist, but the animal population will not cease to exist. So peace comes with them by means of destruction, but not with the same totality as with southern Jordan and southern Iraq. Before I go to the next country, turn to Isaiah 34, which says something else about Edom. Isaiah 34, look at verse 8. Isaiah 34, verse 8. For you have had a day of vengeance, your recompense for the cause of Zion. And the streams of Edom shall be turned into pitch, and the dust thereof into brimstone, and the land thereof shall become burning pitch. It shall not be quenched, night nor day. The smoke thereof shall go up forever, from generation to generation it shall lie waste, none shall pass through it forever and ever. So notice there's going to be not merely a divine judgment upon the land of Edom, also being fire and brimstone that will continue burning for the whole 1,000 years. And while the rest of the world is going to be blossoming as the rose, the land of Edom will be nothing but a perpetual burning wasteland. You'll notice in the following verses he mentions the list of different animals. But animals as we know them are not animals that could survive in a land of burning pitch and burning brimstones. So what they really are, we can see if you look at verse 14, he mentions the wild goats. What the Hebrew word for the wild goats, the meaning is these are dealing with demons with facial features of wild goats. And he also mentions the night monster. That Hebrew phrase, Lilith, refers to demons that work in the hours of the night. So these are not actual little animals that cannot live in a land of burning pitch and burning brimstone. These are animals that will be living. But these animals are demonic. And demons will be located in two categories, not in the abyss like Satan will be. One will be this one, Edom or southern Jordan. Now turn to Isaiah chapter 13. This part is not in your outline. We're going to deal with Babylonia. Babylonia is now southern Iraq. How he described was happening in the land of Edom, he describes here in chapter 13 of Isaiah, verses 17 through 22. 17 through 22. His focus is now in the land of the Chaldeans. So verse 19, notice, in Babylon the glory of the kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldeans' pride, shall be as God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah, which was by fire and brimstone. Verse 20, it shall never be inhabited, neither shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation, neither shall the Arabian pitch his tent there, neither shall shepherds make their flocks there. He goes on to mention animals, and again he mentions the wild goats. That's in verse 21. And again, the Hebrew term here refers to demons whose facial features are that of a wild goat. So The second place where demons will be confined within will be the land of Babylonia. Today that is southern Iraq. And if you look at Revelation chapter 19, that reaffirms what's happening with Babylonia. Revelation chapter 19. Like in chapter 18. That was my first mistake. This is my last one. And my last one wasn't all that long ago. Verse 1 of chapter 18. After these things I saw another angel coming down out of heaven, having great authority, and the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried with a mighty voice, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, and has become the habitation of demons, and a hold of every unclean spirit, and a hold for every hateful bird. For by the wine of the wrath of her fornication, all of the nations are fallen, and the kings of the earth committed fornication with them, and the merchants of the earth waxed rich by the power of her wantonness. So, but Babylonia faces the same thing that Edom faces, and Babylonia is southern Iraq, and this is where demons would be also confined in and suffering the wrath of God with continuous burning and continuous destruction. And so the whole world is beautified like the Garden of Eden. There'll be two desolate spots, so continuously burning with smoke. Southern Jordan, Edom, or southern Iraq, Babylonia. Okay, let's go back to Jeremiah 49. We have one more country to deal with, and that is Iran. The present worst enemy of Israel happens to be Iran. But Iran is not an Arab country, it's a Persian country, and their language is not Arabic, it's Farsi. What they share with the Arab world is the Islamic religion. So what we read is that there's a future destruction coming upon Iran in verses 34 through 38. 34 through 38. But notice the concluding verse, verse 39. It shall come to pass in the latter days that I'll bring back the captivity of Elam. Elam is the older name for what became Persia, and Persia is a subsequent name that's now transferred to Iran. But come ultimately, initially by destruction, but ultimately by means of conversion. So as we look at all of these prophecies and how specific they are, and they'll be fulfilled as it is written, and some with occupation, some with destruction, but we can thank the Lord there'll be not only a national conversion of Israel, which fulfills the prerequisite to the second coming, but also there's going to be a number of present-day Arabic nations that will also come to a national faith. And we don't see it happening now, but it will happen because the Word of God says so. Sila. How we...